The dust never settled in Granger's Hollow. It hung in the air like a grudge, coating everything: the weathered storefronts, the hitching posts, the faces of people who'd learned long ago that hoping for better was a fool's errand. Alara Quinn had stopped hoping 3 years ago, right around the time her father's cough turned permanent and the debts started piling up like winter snow. She stood now at the edge of the Maddox Ranch, a leather satchel clutched in both hands, staring at a house that didn't belong in this landscape. 3 stories of white-painted wood and glass windows that caught the late afternoon sun like teeth. Columns. An actual portico. It looked like someone had ripped a plantation house out of the South and dropped it onto the Wyoming frontier as a joke. Alara smoothed her skirt, the gray one, the only one without patches visible from 10 feet away, and started up the drive. Her boots kicked up small clouds with each step. She'd walked 4 miles from town because the stagecoach fare was 50 cents she didn't have, and her feet knew it. But Reuben Coltrane, the ranch foreman who'd come into her shop last week, had been clear. Maddox Ranch needed a seamstress, room and board included, wages fair, start immediately. It was the immediately that had sold her. Immediately meant before the bank took the house, before her father's medicine ran out, before she had to choose which problem to solve and which to let kill them. She was 20 feet from the porch when she heard the music. Alara stopped. Violin strings, bright and quick. Laughter, the kind that came easy, from people who'd never counted coins by candlelight. Through the windows she could see movement, flashes of color, dresses that cost more than her father made in a year, men in tailored suits, a party. Her stomach dropped. Had she gotten the day wrong? She pulled the crumpled note from her pocket, squinting at Reuben's scrawled handwriting. Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Come to the house. It was Tuesday. The church bell had struck 4 just as she'd cleared the property gate. Maybe she was supposed to go around back, to the servants' entrance. That made sense. Seamstresses didn't walk through the front door of places like this. She started to retreat, to find her way to the kitchen, when the front door swung open. A woman emerged, all rustling silk and calculated grace. Her dress was the color of champagne. Her dark hair swept up in an elaborate twist that probably required a lady's maid and an engineering degree. She saw Alara and stopped, one gloved hand still on the doorframe. "Can I help you?" The words were polite. The tone was not. Alara's mouth went dry. I'm here to see Mr. Maddox about the seamstress position." The woman's eyebrows rose. Behind her, more people had gathered in the doorway, drawn by curiosity or boredom or the simple pleasure of watching someone squirm. The seamstress position. The woman repeated it like Alara had said something in a foreign language. "Today." "Yes, ma'am, I was told." "Catherine, who is it?" A man's voice, cultured and slightly impatient, came from inside. The woman, Catherine, didn't turn around. Her eyes stayed fixed on Alara with the kind of focus a cat gives a mouse. "Some girl claiming she's here about a seamstress job." "Today?" The disbelief was spreading. Catherine smiled, thin and sharp. "That's what I said." More people crowded the doorway now. Alara could feel their stares like hands, pulling at her cheap dress, her dusty boots, the way her braid had come half undone during the walk. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth, to have never walked up this godforsaken driveway in the first place. "I'm sorry," Alara managed, backing up a step. There's been a mistake. There certainly has been." Catherine descended the porch steps, and the crowd followed like she was leading a parade. "Did Reuben put you up to this?" "No, ma'am. He just said, because if this is some kind of prank—" "It's not. I swear. Alara's heel caught on a stone, and she stumbled backward, catching herself before she fell, but losing her grip on the satchel. It hit the ground, spilling its contents: thread, needles, a half-finished shirt she'd been working on for a customer who still owed her for the last 3 jobs. Someone laughed. Alara dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather everything, her face burning hot enough to start fires. This was a nightmare. This was worse than a nightmare because nightmares ended, and this just kept going, every second stretching out like taffy while these people, these rich, perfumed, cruel people, watched her grovel in the dirt. "Oh, this is precious," a man said. Young from the sound of him, drunk from the slur. Did someone order entertainment? Because this is better than the string quartet. More laughter. Alara's hands shook as she shoved the last spool of thread into her bag. She didn't look up, couldn't look up. If she looked at their faces, at the amusement and contempt, she'd either cry or scream, and neither would help. That's enough. The new voice cut through the noise like a blade, deep, quiet, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. The laughter died. Alara's hands stilled. Slowly, she raised her head. He stood at the top of the porch steps, and the crowd had parted for him without seeming to realize it. Tall, taller than any man had a right to be, with shoulders that strained against a black suit jacket. His face was all hard angles and storm cloud eyes, the kind of face that made you think of granite and winter. Dark hair, slightly too long. A jaw that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. Colt Maddox. It had to be. She'd never seen him, but she'd heard the stories. Everyone had. He came down the steps, slow and deliberate, and the crowd retreated like a tide. His eyes never left Alara's face. "You're the seamstress," he said. Not a question. Alara struggled to her feet, clutching the satchel to her chest. Yes, I thought Reuben said." "I know what Reuben said." Maddox stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing. Not just his size, but something else. A coiled tension, like a storm about to break. "He was supposed to send you to the East Wing, not the main house." "I didn't know. I'm sorry. You'll stay." Alara blinked. "What?" Maddox turned to face the crowd, his expression unreadable. "Catherine, everyone. I appreciate you coming, but there's been a change of plans." Catherine's face went pale, then red. "Colt, what are you—" "The engagement is off." A collective gasp. Someone dropped a glass, and it shattered, loud in the sudden silence. "You can't be serious," Catherine said, her voice tight. "Your father arranged—" "My father is dead." Maddox's tone didn't change, but something in the air shifted, became colder. "And I'm not marrying you." Catherine looked like she'd been slapped. "After everything, the contracts, the agreements, the alliance between our families. Void, all of it." Maddox turned back to Alara, and before she could process what was happening, he'd closed the distance between them and taken her hand. His grip was firm, almost too firm, and warm through her thin glove. "Because I'm already married." The world tilted. Alara stared at him, her mouth open, no sound coming out. Around them chaos erupted, shocked voices, Catherine's cry of outrage, someone demanding an explanation, but it all seemed very far away, muffled, like she was underwater. Maddox leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "Play along. I'll explain later. Do this, and I'll pay you more than you'd make in 10 years of sewing." Then louder, pitched to Carrie. "Everyone, meet my wife, Alara Maddox." He pulled her close, one arm sliding around her waist, and the crowd surged forward. Questions, accusations, Catherine's voice rising above the rest, demanding to know when this happened, how, why no one was informed. Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Maddox's hand was iron hard against her back, holding her upright, and she realized dimly that without it, she would have collapsed. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on some point over the crowd's head, and he looked about as happy as a man facing a firing squad. "This is insane," Catherine spat, pushing through the throng. "You're lying. This is some desperate—" "Careful, Catherine." Maddox's voice could have frozen whiskey. "You're speaking about my wife." "Your wife?" Catherine laughed, shrill and disbelieving. This ragamuffin shows up covered in dust and you expect us to believe— I don't care what you believe." Maddox's arm tightened around Alara. "The marriage is legal, witnessed, binding, and you're trespassing on my property." Catherine's face went white. "Your father promised?" "I don't give a damn what my father promised. Get out, all of you." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Catherine turned on her heel and stalked toward a waiting carriage, her dress snapping behind her like a flag. The crowd followed, some quickly, some reluctantly, throwing glances back over their shoulders. Within minutes, the drive was empty, except for the dust their departure kicked up. Maddox waited until the last carriage disappeared around the bend. Then he released Alara and stepped back, putting 3 feet of space between them. Alara swayed, catching herself on the porch railing. Her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. What the hell was that? A solution. Maddox ran a hand through his hair, messing it further. To both our problems, if you're smart enough to see it.
Smart enough? You just told 200 people I'm your wife. I did. I'm not. Not yet. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not kindness, not warmth, but a sort of grim calculation, like he was measuring her for a coffin. But you could be. For a year. Maybe less if we're lucky. Alara backed up a step. You're insane. Probably. He pulled a silver case from his jacket, extracted a cigarette, lit it with a match struck one-handed against the railing. But I'm also rich, and you're broke. So let's talk business. Your father owes the bank $4,000. The house is collateral. You've got maybe 2 months before they seize it. He took a drag, exhaled smoke through his nose. You make what, $15 a month doing piecework? On a good month? Alara's stomach clenched. How do you... I know everyone's debts in this county. It's my business to know. Another drag. You can't save the house, not in time, but I can. Today. 1 telegram, and the debt disappears. In exchange for what? A year of your life. He flicked ash onto the ground. You play my wife. Publicly. Convincingly. You live here, attend events, smile when you're supposed to smile. In return, I clear your father's debt, pay you a salary of $200 a month, and at the end of the year, I give you $10,000 cash and we part ways. Clean divorce. No questions asked. Alara's head spun. $200 a month. $10,000 at the end. That was impossible money. More than she'd see in a lifetime. Why? She managed. Because my father's business partners think they can control me through marriage. Catherine's family has been pushing this engagement for 5 years, since before my father died. They think once we're married, they'll have influence over the ranch, the cattle contracts, the land deals. His jaw tightened. They're wrong, and I'm done playing along. So marry someone else. Someone you actually... No. The word was flat, final. I'm not marrying anyone. Not really. This is a business arrangement. 1 year, then it's over. No complications, no feelings, no expectations beyond the contract. But why me? He smiled then, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Because you're nobody. No family connections, no social standing, no reason for anyone to think this is anything but what it looks like. A reckless mistake I made. It insults Catherine's family, breaks the engagement, and gives me breathing room to restructure my father's agreements without their interference. I'm convenient, Alara said quietly. You're perfect. He stubbed out the cigarette. And you're desperate enough to say yes. She wanted to hit him, wanted to tell him to go to hell, that she'd find another way, that she didn't need his money or his cold calculations or his fake marriage. But the words stuck in her throat because he was right. She was desperate. And this insane, impossible offer was the only lifeline she'd seen in 3 years of drowning. 1 year, she said. 1 year. And at the end I walk away with $10,000. No strings. No strings. And my father's debt is cleared. Immediately. The telegram goes out tonight. Alara looked at the house, at the windows still glowing with lamplight, at the vast expanse of land rolling away in every direction. This world wasn't hers, would never be hers. But for 1 year she could pretend. And at the end, she'd have enough to start over. To give her father the medicine he needed. To maybe, finally, breathe. One condition, she said. Maddox raised an eyebrow. No one can know it's fake. Not your staff, not your business partners. No one. If we're doing this, we do it all the way. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. Agreed. Then I need a few things. A story, how we met, when we married, details people will ask about. We'll work it out tonight. And clothes, I can't... She gestured at her dress, her dusty boots. I can't look like this if I'm supposed to be your wife. I'll have a seamstress, a real one, come tomorrow. You'll have whatever you need. And my father. I need to see him. Explain. She stopped. What do I tell him? The truth. Maddox's expression was unreadable. That you married me to save his house. He doesn't need to know the rest. Alara nodded slowly. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her heart had slowed to something approaching normal. This was happening. She was doing this. Do we have a deal? Maddox extended his hand. Alara looked at it, strong, scarred, offering salvation and lies in equal measure. Then she reached out and shook it. We have a deal. What?
The house was bigger inside than it had any right to be. Maddox led her through a marble-floored entrance hall, past a sweeping staircase that belonged in a cathedral, down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men who all seemed to share Maddox's jawline and general air of disapproval. Your family? Alara asked, struggling to keep up with his long strides. Unfortunately, he pushed open a heavy oak door and gestured her inside. The room beyond was clearly an office. Massive desk, leather chairs, walls lined with books and maps. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace big enough to roast a pig. Maddox crossed to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He held one out to Alara. I don't drink, she said. You do now. You'll need it. She took the glass. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied something in her chest that had been rattling loose since the moment he'd grabbed her hand. Maddox drained his own glass in one swallow and poured another. We need a story, something believable. For 200 people who just watched you claim me as your wife out of nowhere? Exactly. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. We'll say we met 6 months ago. You were working as a seamstress in town. I came in to have some shirts repaired. Romantic, Alara said dryly. It's not supposed to be romantic. It's supposed to be plausible. He frowned. We started talking. I kept coming back. Eventually, I asked you to dinner. Where? What? Where did we have dinner? People will ask details. Maddox thought. The Sterling Hotel, private dining room. I've never been there. You have now. The room has red wallpaper, a chandelier, terrible paintings of fruit. The steak is good, the wine is overpriced. Alara filed it away. Then what? Then I courted you, quietly. We kept it secret because you knew your father wanted you to marry Catherine, Alara finished, and you didn't want to deal with his reaction. Right. Maddox's mouth twitched. We married 3 weeks ago. Small ceremony. Judge Patterson. Will he back that up? He'll do what I pay him to do. Comforting. You want it all the way, Maddox said. This is all the way. Alara set down her glass. What about the people who work here, your staff? They're going to know I wasn't here 3 weeks ago. I'll handle them. As far as anyone knows, you were living in town, finishing up work commitments. Today was the day you moved in. And my father? What about him? He'll tell people I wasn't married 3 weeks ago. Maddox refilled his glass. Will he? The question hung in the air. Alara thought about her father, sick, proud, desperate to believe his daughter might still have a chance at something better. If she told him she'd married well, married rich, married into security, would he question it? Or would he be too relieved to care about the timeline? No, she said quietly. He won't. Then we're set. Maddox straightened. I'll have a room prepared for you, adjacent to mine. People will expect that. There's a connecting door, but it locks on both sides. Use it. Believe me, I will. Tomorrow morning, we'll go into town together. Make an appearance. Let people see us. Start building the story. And tonight you stay here. Rest. Process whatever you need to process. He moved toward the door, then paused. This isn't going to be easy, Alara. People will talk. They'll judge. Catherine's family won't take this lying down. You'll be walking into a war zone. I've been in war zones before, Alara said. Just different kinds. Something shifted in his expression. I suppose you have. He opened the door. Mrs. Granger, my housekeeper, will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. We'll eat together. Might as well start the performance now. Maddox? He turned. Why are you really doing this? Alara asked. There are easier ways to get out of an engagement. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, Because the easy ways leave openings, and I'm done letting other people think they have power over my life. He left before she could respond. Mrs. Granger turned out to be a thin woman with iron gray hair and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled. She appeared in the doorway within seconds of Maddox's departure, as if she'd been listening in the hall. "Follow me," was all she said. The room she led Alara to was larger than the entire first floor of her father's house. 4-poster bed, wardrobe that could have held a dozen women's entire wardrobes, windows overlooking land that seemed to stretch forever, and yes, a connecting door on the far wall, currently closed. "Bathrooms through there," Mrs. Granger said, pointing. "Water's heated by the furnace, so you can actually take a hot bath. Dinner's at 7 sharp. Mr. Maddox doesn't tolerate lateness." "I'll be ready." Mrs. Granger's eyes traveled over Alara's dress, her dusty boots, her wind-tangled hair. "I'll have Lucy bring up some things. You can't wear that to dinner." "I appreciate. It's not kindness, girl. It's necessity. You're Mrs. Maddox now, whether you deserve to be or not. That means representing this house properly." She started to leave, then stopped at the door. "I don't know what game you and Mr. Maddox are playing. I don't care. But understand this. This house has rules. You'll follow them, or you'll answer to me." The door closed with a decisive click. Alara stood in the middle of the enormous room, suddenly more alone than she'd felt in years. The silence was oppressive. The luxury was suffocating. Everything smelled like furniture polish and old money and lives she could never understand. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful. Indifferent. What had she done? Married a stranger. That's what she'd done. Sold a year of her life to a man who looked at her like a chess piece. Stepped into a role she had no idea how to play, surrounded by people who already hated her. But her father's house was safe. The debt would be cleared. And in 1 year, she'd walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere far from here. 1 year. She could survive anything for 1 year. A knock at the connecting door made her jump. It opened before she could respond, and Maddox stood in the frame, still in his suit, but with his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. "I forgot to give you this," he said, holding out a small wooden box. Alara crossed the room and took it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring. Gold, simple, with a small diamond that caught the fading light. "It was my mother's," Maddox said. "People will expect you to wear it." Alara lifted it from the box. It was warm from his pocket. "Your mother died when I was 12. She wouldn't care what we're using it for." Alara slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which seemed like either a good omen or a terrible joke. She held up her hand, watching the diamond sparkle. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's a prop." Maddox's voice was flat. "Don't read anything into it." "I wasn't—" "Dinner at 7, he interrupted. "Don't be late." He disappeared back into his room, and the door closed with a finality that felt like a statement. Alara looked down at the ring on her finger. A dead woman's jewelry on a living woman's lie. She laughed, short and sharp, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to her own ears. This was her life now. This was the choice she'd made. She'd better learn to live with it. Dinner was a stilted, awkward affair conducted in a dining room that could have seated 30, but currently held 2. Maddox sat at the head of the table, Alara to his right, with enough empty space between them to park a wagon. Lucy, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, served course after course in terrified silence. Soup, salad, beef that melted under Alara's fork. Vegetables she didn't recognize, wine she pretended to drink. Maddox ate mechanically, like it was a chore. They didn't speak. Finally, as Lucy was clearing the main course, Alara set down her fork. "We can't do this." Maddox looked up. "Do what?" "This. Sit here in silence like strangers. People are going to expect us to at least pretend to like each other. We're married, not courting. Married people don't have to talk at dinner. Newlyweds do." Alara leaned forward. "If we're going to sell this, we need to be convincing. That means practicing, learning about each other, acting like we actually chose this." Maddox's jaw tightened. "Fine. What do you want to know?" Everything. Where you went to school, what you do all day, your favorite. I was educated by tutors here on the ranch. I spend my days managing cattle operations, negotiating contracts, and dealing with problems most people can't solve themselves. I don't have a favorite anything because I don't think in those terms. He picked up his wine glass. Your turn. Where are you from? What's your family like? Why sewing? Ilara sat back. I was born in Granger's Hollow. My mother died when I was 8, fever. My father raised me. He was a carpenter, a good one, until his lungs started failing. I learned to sew because someone had to earn money, and sewing was something I could do from home while taking care of him. Siblings? No. Friends? Not anymore. Hard to maintain friendships when you're too busy surviving. Something flickered in Maddox's eyes. I know the feeling. They looked at each other across the expanse of polished wood, and for just a moment, the performance fell away. Two people who'd learned the hard way that the world didn't give you anything you didn't fight for. Then Maddox set down his glass. We should talk about expectations, boundaries. All right? In public, we're affectionate. Not excessive, but enough to be believable. I'll take your arm, you'll take mine. We'll sit close at events. If anyone asks, we're happy. And in private? In private, we're business partners. You have your room, I have mine. We coordinate our stories, maintain the illusion, and otherwise stay out of each other's way. No feelings, Ilara said. No feelings, Maddox confirmed. This is a transaction. Clean, simple, temporary. What if I break the rules? You won't. But if I did, Maddox's expression hardened. Then the deal is off. And you lose everything. The threat hung in the air, cold and clear. Understood, Ilara said quietly. Lucy returned with dessert, some kind of cake dripping with sauce. Ilara picked at it, her appetite gone. Maddox finished his in 4 bites and stood. I have work to do. I'll see you at breakfast. 8 o'clock. He left without waiting for a response. Ilara sat alone in the cavernous dining room, surrounded by china and crystal and the ghosts of the life she was pretending to have. The cake tasted like ash. She made it back to her room before the shaking started. Reaction, delayed but inevitable. She'd held it together through everything, the humiliation, the proposal, the dinner. But now, alone, the weight of it crashed down. She'd married a stranger. She was living a lie, and for the next year she had to make everyone believe it was real. Ilara sank onto the bed, still wearing the borrowed dress Lucy had brought up, dark blue silk that fit surprisingly well. The ring on her finger felt heavy. The room felt like a cage. The future felt like a cliff edge she was running toward in the dark. But the alternative was losing her father's house, watching him die without medicine, spending the rest of her life scraping by on $15 a month. This was survival. It just looked different than she'd expected. Ilara stood, walked to the window. Outside, the ranch was settling into darkness. Somewhere out there, Maddox was probably in his office, working on whatever cattle barons worked on. Somewhere in town, Catherine was probably planning revenge. Somewhere far away, her father was sitting in a house he didn't know was safe now, wondering where his daughter had gone. Tomorrow she'd go see him, tell him the news. Watch his face light up with relief and confusion, and something that might be pride. Tomorrow, she'd walk through Granger's Hollow on Maddox's arm and let people stare. Tomorrow, she'd start becoming someone she wasn't. But tonight, just for tonight, she could be terrified. Ilara pressed her hand against the glass, watching her reflection waver in the lamplight. The woman staring back looked young and small and entirely out of her depth. 1 year, she whispered to her reflection. You can do this for 1 year. Her reflection didn't look convinced. Plunk. She woke to Lucy knocking softly at the door, bearing a breakfast tray and news that Mr. Maddox would like her to join him in the stable yard at 9. Ilara ate quickly, eggs, toast, coffee that tasted better than anything she'd ever made, and dressed in another borrowed outfit, this one a riding skirt and white blouse that made her look like she belonged in a catalog. The stable yard was chaos. Ranch hands moved everywhere, leading horses, carrying saddles, shouting instructions. The air smelled like hay and leather and animals. Real. Honest. Nothing like the perfumed parlor from yesterday. Maddox stood near the largest barn talking to an older man in a battered hat.
He saw Alara and said something that made the other man nod and walk away. "You ride?" Maddox asked as she approached. "Horses? No. We'll fix that. You're a rancher's wife now. People will expect—" "I know what people will expect." Alara crossed her arms. "But I'm not learning to ride this morning.
I'm going to see my father.
I'll take you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. We're newlyweds, remember?"
I'm not letting you go to town alone." He gestured toward a carriage hitched near the barn. "It'll give us a chance to be seen together. Start the rumors working in our favor." Alara wanted to argue but couldn't find solid ground. He was right, and the carriage ride would give them more time to coordinate their story. The drive to town took 20 minutes. Maddox handled the horses with an easy competence that spoke of years in the saddle. They didn't talk much, what was there to say, but the silence felt less hostile than it had at dinner. Granger's Hollow came into view, dusty and familiar and suddenly very small. Alara had lived here her whole life, but seeing it now, after a night in the Maddox house, it looked different, shabbier, more desperate. People noticed the carriage immediately. Heads turned, conversations stopped. By the time Maddox pulled up in front of her father's house, half the town was staring. "Ready?" Maddox asked. "No." "Me neither." He climbed down, then extended his hand to help her. "But we're doing it anyway." His hand was steady, warm. When her feet hit the ground, he didn't let go immediately, and she realized it was for show. They were performing now. She forced herself to smile at him. "Thank you." "Anything for you, darling." The endearment sounded foreign in his mouth, but his eyes held hers, and for a second she almost believed him. Then he released her hand, and the spell broke. Alara's father appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face pale, his eyes confused. "Alara, what?" He saw Maddox, and his expression shifted to alarm. "What's going on?" This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. Alara climbed the 3 steps to the porch and took her father's free hand. "Papa, I have news. Good news." She swallowed. "I got married." Her father stared at her. "You what?" "Married. 3 weeks ago. I wanted to tell you sooner, but everything happened so fast, and— 3 weeks?" His voice rose. "Alara, 3 weeks ago you were working at the shop. You never said—" "Who?" He looked past her at Maddox. "Who is this?" "Colt Maddox, sir." Maddox came up the steps, hand extended. "I understand this is a shock. Your daughter and I wanted to tell you before we married, but circumstances—" "Maddox." Her father's face had gone white. "The cattle baron. Alara, what have you done?" "I fell in love, Papa." The lie tasted bitter. "We met months ago. We kept it quiet because of his family situation, but we couldn't wait any longer. We married, and now—" She squeezed his hand. "Now everything is going to be all right. Your debts are cleared. The house is safe. You can rest." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "Alara, you shouldn't have. I never wanted you to—" "I know." She pulled him into a hug, feeling how fragile he'd become. "But it's done, and I'm happy. I promise." Over her father's shoulder, she saw Maddox watching them, his expression unreadable. This was what they'd bought with their lie. Her father's relief, his tears, his desperate gratitude. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like drowning. They stayed at her father's house for an hour, long enough for the news to spread through Granger's Hollow like wildfire. Alara watched through the window as neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, pointing at the Maddox carriage parked in front of the Quinn house like a declaration of war. Mrs. Patterson from the general store actually pressed her face against the glass, trying to get a better look inside. Her father sat in his worn armchair, still gripping the handkerchief he'd been using to wipe his eyes. He kept looking at Alara like she might disappear, like this whole thing was a fever dream brought on by his illness. "I don't understand," he said for the 3rd time. "How did you even meet him?" Alara had her story ready. "He came into town for supplies, stopped by the shop to have some shirts mended. We started talking." She glanced at Maddox, who stood by the fireplace with the rigid posture of a man enduring torture. "He kept coming back." "For 6 months, and you never mentioned him?" "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure."
The lie came easier now, smoothed by repetition. You know how people talk, Papa. I didn't want rumors if it didn't work out. Her father's gaze shifted to Maddox. And you? You could have any woman in 3 counties. Why my daughter? Maddox met his eyes without flinching. Because she's the only one who didn't want me for my money. It was, Alara realized, probably the first honest thing he'd said all morning. Her father seemed to accept it. He nodded slowly, then looked down at his hands. The debt. You said it's cleared? As of this morning, Maddox confirmed. The bank received payment in full. The house is yours, free and clear. I can't accept that. It's too much. I should work out a payment plan with you. I can... Sir. Maddox's voice was firm, but not unkind. Your daughter is my wife. What's mine is hers. That includes the ability to help her family. There's no debt between us. Alara's father broke down again, and she held him while he cried into her shoulder, whispering apologies she didn't want to hear. Maddox turned away, giving them privacy, his jaw tight. When they finally left, half the town was waiting outside. Alara felt their stares like brands as Maddox helped her into the carriage. Someone called out a question about the wedding. Why hadn't anyone been invited? Maddox ignored it, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. Smile, he murmured as they pulled away. Look happy. Alara forced her mouth into something approximating joy and waved at the crowd. Inside, her stomach churned. The ride back to the ranch was silent until they cleared the town limits. Then Maddox spoke without looking at her. You're good at this. At what? Lying. You almost had me convinced back there. Alara's hands tightened in her lap. I wasn't lying about everything. No? No. I do want my father taken care of. That part's real. But the rest isn't. It wasn't a question. Neither is yours, Alara shot back. Or are you going to tell me you actually fell in love with a seamstress you've known for 12 hours? Maddox's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. Fair point. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, less hostile. More like 2 people who'd found themselves in the same trench and were making the best of it. The ranch appeared ahead, sprawling and imposing in the noon sun. As they approached, Alara saw a cluster of riders near the main barn. Ranch hands, maybe 20 of them, all turning to watch the carriage. Your staff? She asked. Some of them. The others are out with the herds. Maddox slowed the horses. I told them this morning about you. How'd they take it? About as well as you'd expect. Shock, disbelief. Reuben looked like I'd shot him. Reuben. The foreman who was supposed to send me to the East Wing. That's the one. He's been with my family for 30 years. He'll come around. And if he doesn't? Maddox's expression hardened. Then he'll find work elsewhere. You're my wife now. Anyone who can't respect that can leave. There was something almost protective in his tone, and it caught Alara off guard. This wasn't part of their deal. This was him defending her for real, not for show. Before she could process that, Maddox pulled the carriage to a stop in front of the house. Mrs. Granger stood on the porch, arms crossed, looking like she'd been waiting to deliver bad news. Mr. Maddox, she called as they climbed down. You have a visitor. In the parlor. Maddox's jaw tightened. Who? Miss Whitmore. She's been here for an hour. Refused to leave. Catherine. Of course. Alara felt Maddox's hand find hers, his grip firm. Together, he said quietly. They walked into the house side by side, and Alara was conscious of every eye on them, the maids pretending to dust, the footmen lurking near the stairs, all of them watching, judging, waiting to see if this bizarre marriage would crack under its first real test. The parlor doors were closed. Maddox pushed them open without knocking. Catherine sat on the settee, perfectly composed in a dress the color of fresh cream. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate updo, her posture, finishing school, perfect. She looked like she belonged in this room, in this house, in this life. Alara felt like an intruder. Colt! Catherine's voice was warm honey over broken glass. And the new Mrs. Maddox, how cozy. What do you want, Catherine? Maddox didn't release Alara's hand. To talk, privately. Catherine's gaze flicked to Alara.
If you don't mind excusing us. She stays, Maddox said flatly. Really? Because what I have to say concerns her rather intimately. Then say it. Catherine stood, smoothing her skirts. Very well. I've spoken with my father and our lawyers. The engagement contract your father signed was binding. Breaking it has consequences. I'm aware. Are you? Because those consequences include a breach penalty of $50,000 payable immediately. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. $50,000. That was more money than she could imagine, more than most people in Granger's Hollow would see in 5 lifetimes. Maddox didn't even flinch. Send the bill. Colt, be reasonable. This marriage, Catherine gestured at Alara like she was a stain on the furniture. This absurd performance won't hold up. Everyone knows it's fake. Then prove it. I will. I've already hired investigators. They'll dig into every detail of your supposed courtship. Where you went, when you were seen together, who witnessed this secret romance. Catherine smiled, sharp and satisfied. And when they find nothing, because there's nothing to find, your marriage will be annulled for fraud. You'll pay the penalty anyway, plus damages, plus legal fees that will make $50,000 look like pocket change. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't thought about investigators, about people actively trying to tear apart their story. They'd been married less than 24 hours and already the walls were closing in. But Maddox just shrugged. Good luck with that. You're not worried? Should I be? I married a woman I love. That's not fraud, Catherine. That's just something you can't understand. Catherine's composure cracked. Love. You expect me to believe you fell in love with a nobody seamstress? I expect you to believe whatever you want. I don't really care. Maddox moved toward the door, pulling Alara with him. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have better things to do than listen to threats from a woman who can't accept rejection. This isn't over, Catherine called after them. Yes, Maddox said without turning around. It is. He led Alara out of the parlor, down the hall, and into his office before releasing her hand. Then he paced to the window, running both hands through his hair. $50,000, Alara whispered. Can you actually pay that? If I have to. And if her investigators find out we're lying? They won't. How can you be sure? Maddox turned to face her. Because we're not going to give them anything to find. As of today, we're the most convincing married couple in Wyoming. We go everywhere together. We're affectionate in public. We make sure there are witnesses to our happiness. He crossed his arms. Starting with dinner tonight. Dinner? The Cattlemen's Association holds a monthly gathering. All the major ranchers, their families, business partners. I'm expected to attend, which means you're expected to attend. Alara's stomach dropped. Tonight? I don't know how to. You'll learn. Maddox's expression softened slightly. I know I'm asking a lot, but this is important. These men control the cattle markets, the shipping routes, the bank loans. I need them to see us as a united front. United front, right. Alara laughed, sharp and brittle. Yesterday I was mending shirts for 50 cents. Today I'm supposed to convince a room full of cattle barons that I belong at their table. You don't have to belong. You just have to look like you do. Same thing. No, it's not. Maddox moved closer, his voice dropping. Belonging is about who you are. Looking like you belong is about confidence and the right clothes. We can fix the clothes. The confidence is up to you. Alara wanted to argue, but he was already pulling a cord that summoned Mrs. Granger. When the housekeeper appeared, Maddox gave her instructions to send for the dressmaker immediately and to prepare Alara for an evening event. Mrs. Granger's mouth pinched into a thin line. Very well, sir. As she left, Maddox turned back to Alara. 6 o'clock. We leave at 7. Don't be late. You keep saying that. Because I mean it. These people will judge you for everything. How you dress, how you walk, when you arrive. Being late makes you look disorganized. Disorganized makes you look weak. And looking weak is unacceptable. In their world? Yes. Alara met his eyes. Is it unacceptable in yours? For a long moment, Maddox just looked at her. Then, I haven't decided yet. The dressmaker arrived within the hour, a severe woman named Mrs. Bellamy,
who took one look at Alara and sighed like she'd been asked to dress a scarecrow. She brought 3 assistants and enough fabric to outfit a small army. They worked in Alara's room, pinning and measuring and clucking disapprovingly while Alara stood like a mannequin. Mrs. Bellamy rejected 4 dresses before settling on a deep green silk that brought out Alara's eyes. "It'll have to be altered," Mrs. Bellamy announced. "The waist needs to come in, the hem needs to be raised, and her hair—" She gestured at Alara's simple braid. "We'll need to do something about that." "I can do my own hair," Alara said. "Not for tonight, you can't." "Lucy!" The young maid appeared, looking terrified. "You'll help Mrs. Maddox prepare for this evening. Hair, cosmetics, jewelry. Make her presentable." Lucy bobbed a curtsy. "Yes, ma'am." By 6 o'clock, Alara barely recognized herself. The green dress fit perfectly, cinched at the waist and flowing to the floor in elegant folds. Lucy had worked some kind of magic with her hair, sweeping it up into a style that looked effortless, but had taken 45 minutes to achieve. A touch of rouge on her lips, a hint of powder on her cheeks. She looked like she belonged in this house, like she could walk into a room of cattle barons and hold her head high. She looked like a liar. The connecting door opened and Maddox stepped through, stopping short when he saw her. For a moment he just stared, something unreadable crossing his face. "You clean up well," he finally said. "So do you." He did. The black suit from yesterday had been replaced with something darker, more formal. His hair was combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked dangerous and elegant in equal measure, and Alara felt something flutter in her chest that she immediately suppressed. No feelings. That was the rule. Maddox offered his arm. "Ready?" "No." "Good answer. Let's go anyway." The Cattlemen's Association met at the Sterling Hotel in a private banquet hall that gleamed with chandeliers and polished silver. Alara had never been inside this building, had barely even looked at it when she walked past on her way to the market. Now she was entering on Colt Maddox's arm, and every head in the room turned to watch. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed, became quieter, more pointed. Alara could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "Smile," Maddox murmured, "and whatever happens, don't let go of my arm." A man approached, older, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors. "Maddox, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it, Harrison." Maddox's voice carried an easy confidence that Alara envied. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Alara." Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Your wife? I heard rumors, but I didn't quite believe— Well." He took Alara's hand, kissing it in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and vaguely mocking. "A pleasure, Mrs. Maddox. Though I must say this comes as quite a surprise. We all thought Colt here was set to marry the Whitmore girl." "Plans change," Alara said, finding her voice. "So it seems. And when did this happy event occur?" 3 weeks ago." The lie was smooth now, practiced. "Small ceremony, just family. How intimate. And where are you from, my dear?" "Granger's Hollow." "Ah." The single syllable carried volumes. Judgment, dismissal. The kind of casual cruelty rich people wielded without thinking. "Well, welcome to our little gathering." He moved away, and immediately another couple appeared. Then another. An endless parade of introductions, questions wrapped in politeness, assessments disguised as small talk. Alara answered them all, her smile never wavering, Maddox's arm solid under her hand, but inside she was drowning. These people could smell the lie on her, she was sure of it. They knew she didn't belong, knew this marriage was a sham, knew she was nothing but a desperate seamstress who'd sold herself for security. "Breathe," Maddox said quietly during a brief lull. "You're doing fine." "I'm dying." "You're surviving. There's a difference." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "1 more hour, then we can leave." The dinner itself was torture. Alara sat at Maddox's right, surrounded by people who spoke a language she barely understood. Stock prices, shipping contracts, railroad negotiations. She picked at her food, smiled when appropriate, and tried not to think about how thoroughly she was failing. Across the table, a woman in diamonds leaned forward. "Mrs. Maddox, you simply must tell us how you captured our dear Colt's heart. He's been so stubbornly single for so long." Every eye turned to Alara, waiting, testing.
She looked at Maddox, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Then she took a breath and dove in. "He came into my shop," she said, 6 months ago. He needed some shirts repaired and the regular seamstress was sick. I'd never seen him before, but I knew who he was. Everyone in Granger's Hollow knows the Maddox name. She paused, letting the silence build. He was rude at first, impatient, treated me like help. A few uncomfortable laughs around the table. But he kept coming back, and each time he stayed a little longer. Started asking questions about my work, my life. I think... She glanced at Maddox again. I think he was tired of people only seeing his money. I was the first person in a long time who treated him like a human being. It was close enough to the truth that it felt real, and from the way the table was watching, rapt, it was working. "How romantic," the diamond woman said, but there was less edge in her voice now. Maddox's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once. A silent thank you. They made it through dessert, through coffee, through another round of shallow conversations and pointed questions. Finally, mercifully, Maddox stood and announced they needed to leave. Early morning tomorrow, ranch business. No one protested. They probably couldn't wait to start gossiping the moment the door closed. The carriage ride home was quiet. Alara slumped against the seat, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical effort. "You did well tonight," Maddox said. "I lied through my teeth for 3 hours." "Like I said, well." He looked at her. "That story you told about how we met, about me being rude, was that improvisation or preparation?" "Improvisation. Why?" "Because it was good. Believable. They bought it. They bought it because it's what they wanted to hear. Rich man humbled by honest working woman. It's a fairy tale. Fairy tales work for a reason." Alara closed her eyes. "How long do we have to keep doing this? Events like tonight? Once, maybe twice a month?" "I don't know if I can." "Yes, you can." Maddox's voice was firm. "You survived tonight. You'll survive the next one. And the one after that. It gets easier." "Does it?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Back at the ranch, Alara went straight to her room and started working at the buttons of her dress. Her fingers were shaking too badly to manage them properly. There was a soft knock, and then Lucy appeared. "Let me help, ma'am." Alara stood still while Lucy undid the dozens of tiny buttons down her back. When the dress finally came free, she felt like she could breathe for the first time in hours. "You did real good tonight," Lucy said quietly. "Mrs. Granger said she heard from the kitchen staff at the hotel. Everyone's talking about you, but in a good way mostly. They're saying Mr. Maddox looks happier than they've seen him in years." Alara turned. "He does?" "That's what they're saying." Lucy helped her into a nightgown. "I think it's nice. Him finding someone. His father was a hard man, and after he died, Mr. Maddox just got harder. Like he was turning to stone. But these last 2 days, I don't know. He seems different." Guilt twisted in Alara's stomach. These people wanted to believe the fairy tale, wanted to think their employer had found happiness, and she was part of the lie that would eventually disappoint them all. After Lucy left, Alara sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle moved across the land that Maddox controlled. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Wealth that could buy anything, except honesty. The connecting door opened. Maddox stood in the frame, still in his suit pants and shirt, the tie gone, the collar unbuttoned. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" "Never could. Not since—" He stopped. "Doesn't matter." He moved into the room without asking permission, crossing to the other window. They stood like that, silent, watching the same moonlight paint the same landscape. "Catherine's investigators," Alara finally said. "What if they find something? What if someone in town says they never saw us together before yesterday?" "They won't, because we're going to give them exactly what they're looking for." Maddox turned to face her. "Starting tomorrow, we're going to be seen everywhere. The Mercantile, the church social, the town square. We'll hold hands, we'll laugh. We'll look so sickeningly happy that no one will question it." "That's insane." "That's survival." His jaw set. "I've spent my whole life fighting for control of my own future. My father tried to run my life, then his business partners, then Catherine's family. Every time I had to fight harder, be colder, give less. This marriage, fake or not, is the first choice I've made that's entirely mine, and I'm not letting anyone take it away." There was something raw in his voice, something that went deeper than their arrangement. Alara had thought he was just using her, but maybe it was more complicated than that. Maybe he needed this escape as much as she needed the money. "Okay," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, we'll go to town. We'll perform. Together. Together." Maddox nodded and started back toward the connecting door, but at the threshold he paused. "That thing you said at dinner, about me being tired of people only seeing my money. You weren't entirely wrong." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Alara stood in the moonlight, the ring on her finger catching silver gleams, and wondered what exactly she'd gotten herself into. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, 1 year of pretending in exchange for financial security. But nothing about Colt Maddox felt simple, and the way her heart had jumped when his hand covered hers at dinner, that wasn't part of the deal at all. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of performance and proximity. True to his word, Maddox took Alara everywhere. They attended church socials where she learned to make polite conversation with ranchers' wives who barely concealed their curiosity. They shopped at the Mercantile, Maddox's hand steady at the small of her back, while half the town pretended not to stare. They rode together through the ranch lands, Alara perched nervously on a gentle mare, while Maddox taught her to sit a horse properly, his voice patient in a way that surprised them both. Every appearance was calculated, every touch deliberate. They were building a story, brick by brick, moment by moment, until even Alara sometimes forgot where the performance ended and something else began. It was the small things that got to her. The way Maddox started pouring her coffee in the mornings without asking how she took it, because he'd paid attention and remembered. The night she'd worked late altering one of her new dresses and found him asleep in the chair by her door, as if he'd been waiting to make sure she got to bed safely. The afternoon he'd canceled a business meeting because her father had taken ill and driven her to town himself without a word of complaint. These weren't performances. These were the moments between performances when no one was watching, and they still happened anyway. It terrified her. She'd spent 6 weeks learning how to be Mrs. Colt Maddox in public, but she was also learning how to exist alongside the actual man in private, and that was far more dangerous than any dinner party or town social. Because the real Colt Maddox, the one who emerged when the doors closed and the audience disappeared, was nothing like the cold cattle baron she'd expected. He was sharp-witted and surprisingly funny in a dry, cutting way that caught her off guard. He read voraciously, his office shelves crammed with everything from agricultural journals to poetry that he pretended not to own. He had a scar along his ribs from a horse kick when he was 17, and another on his shoulder from a bullet that he refused to explain. He took his coffee black and his whiskey neat and his solitude seriously, except he'd started taking it less seriously around her. And she was falling. Not quickly, not all at once, but slowly, inevitably, like a cliff eroding under relentless waves. Every shared breakfast, every quiet evening in his office while she sewed and he worked on accounts. Every time he looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve but wanted to. She was breaking the one rule they'd agreed on. No feelings. The realization hit her on a Tuesday morning in late October. She'd woken to find frost on the windows and Maddox already gone, out riding the boundary lines with Reuben. She'd dressed and gone downstairs for breakfast, and Mrs. Granger had mentioned offhandedly that the master had left orders for the kitchen to make Alara's favorite, apple tarts, because she'd mentioned once, weeks ago, that her mother used to make them. Such a small thing, a thoughtless kindness that he'd probably already forgotten. But Alara had stood in the dining room staring at the pastry on her plate and felt her chest constrict with something that absolutely could not be allowed. She was in love with her fake husband, and she had no idea what to do about it. The sound of horses in the yard pulled her from her thoughts. She moved to the window and saw Maddox dismounting, his face set in hard lines. Reuben was with him, along with 3 other ranch hands, all of them looking grim. Something was wrong. Alara met him in the entrance hall. His clothes were dusty, his expression darker than she'd seen in weeks. "What happened?" "Fence line's been cut, north pasture. We lost about 30 head of cattle." His voice was flat, controlled, but she could see the fury underneath. "Someone's stealing from me." "Who would—" "I have theories." He pulled off his gloves, slapped them against his thigh. "Ruben's organizing a night watch. I'll be riding out this evening." "For how long?" "However long it takes to catch whoever's behind this." He started toward his office, then stopped. "There's a problem. The Harvest Festival is this weekend. Everyone expects us to attend. Together." Alara's stomach sank. She'd forgotten about the festival. The biggest social event of the season, where every family in 3 counties gathered for food, dancing, and the kind of public scrutiny that made dinner parties look like intimate gatherings. "Can we skip it?" "No. Missing it would raise questions, make it look like we're hiding." Maddox ran a hand through his hair. "But I can't leave the ranch unguarded for an entire evening, not with someone actively stealing from me." "So what do we do?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You go without me, make an appearance. Stay an hour, make excuses for my absence, then come home." "Alone?" "Ruben will drive you. He'll stay close." Maddox's jaw tightened. "I know it's asking a lot, but we need to maintain appearances. If we both miss it, Catherine's investigators will use it as evidence that the marriage is failing." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't ready to face that crowd alone without him as her buffer and shield. But they'd made a deal, and part of that deal was doing exactly this kind of thing. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll go." Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you." He left before she could respond, disappearing into his office and closing the door with a decisive click. Alara stood in the empty hallway, feeling the weight of Saturday evening already pressing down on her shoulders. The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Maddox spent his nights riding the property, coming back at dawn exhausted and no closer to catching the thieves. Alara worked with Mrs. Bellamy on a new dress for the festival, deep burgundy with gold trim, elegant enough to turn heads. Lucy practiced increasingly elaborate hairstyles while chattering about how exciting it was that Mrs. Maddox would be attending such an important event. No one seemed to notice that Alara was slowly unraveling. Saturday arrived cold and clear. Maddox had been out all night and came back just after breakfast, his face haggard, his clothes mud-spattered. He found Alara in the library, ostensibly reading but actually staring at the same page for 20 minutes. "Still nothing," he said without preamble. "Whoever it is knows the land, knows how to move without leaving tracks." "You should rest." "Can't. I need to go back out before dark." He moved to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. "About tonight, if anyone asks where I am, ranch emergency. I'll handle it." Alara set down her book. "Colt, are you sure this is worth it? The festival?" "It has to be. Catherine's lawyers are already trying to build a case that our marriage is fraudulent. Every public appearance helps counter that." He turned to face her. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." "I know." Something passed between them, one of those moments that had become more frequent, where the performance fell away and they just looked at each other, really looked, and saw past the deal they'd made to something neither of them knew how to name. Maddox broke it first. "I should go. Be careful tonight. And if anything feels wrong, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you leave immediately. Ruben will have the carriage ready." "I'll be fine." He nodded but didn't move, and Alara had the sudden, irrational urge to cross the room and touch him, to smooth the tension from his shoulders, to tell him he didn't have to carry everything alone. Instead, she stayed where she was, the width of the library between them, and watched him walk away. By 6 o'clock, Alara was dressed and ready, feeling like a soldier preparing for battle. The burgundy dress fit perfectly, the gold trim catching the lamplight. Lucy had outdone herself with Alara's hair, sweeping it into an intricate updo that probably cost more in pins than Alara used to make in a month. Maddox appeared briefly before she left, still in his work clothes, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her chest tighten. "Thank you." "Remember, 1 hour, then come home." "1 hour," she echoed. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, and for a breathless second she thought he might touch her. Actually touch her, not for show, but because he wanted to. But his hand dropped. "Be safe." Then he was gone, back to the darkness and the stolen cattle and the endless work of keeping his world from falling apart. Alara climbed into the carriage beside Ruben, who nodded respectfully and said nothing as they started toward town. The old foreman had warmed to her over the past weeks, especially after she'd sewn up a torn jacket for him without being asked. He still looked at her sometimes like he was trying to figure out what game she and Maddox were playing, but at least he'd stopped looking openly hostile. The festival was in full swing when they arrived. The town square had been transformed with lanterns, streamers, and long tables groaning under food. Music spilled from a makeshift stage where a fiddle band was working through a lively reel. People clustered everywhere, dancing, eating, laughing with the kind of abandon that came from harvest season ending and winter not yet arrived. Alara stepped down from the carriage and immediately felt every eye turn her way. Conversations paused. The music seemed to dim. Mrs. Colt Maddox arriving alone. She lifted her chin and walked into the crowd like she owned it. The first hour was manageable. She made the rounds, smiling and nodding, accepting congratulations on her marriage with practiced grace. People asked about Maddox, and she delivered her prepared excuse. Ranch emergency? He sent his regrets. He'll be devastated to miss it. Most people accepted it with varying degrees of sympathy or skepticism. But as the evening wore on and the crowd grew more animated, Alara felt her control slipping. Without Maddox's solid presence beside her, she was adrift. Every question felt like a test. Every smile felt like a lie wearing through at the edges. She was standing near the refreshment table, trying to look engaged in a conversation about winter wheat yields, when she felt a hand on her elbow. Catherine Whitmore stood beside her, resplendent in ice blue silk, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Mrs. Maddox, how lovely to see you, though I notice you're here alone." Alara's spine straightened. Ranch business. Colt couldn't get away. Couldn't or wouldn't? Catherine's voice was light, conversational, pitched just loud enough for the nearby conversations to pause. It must be difficult being abandoned at social events so soon after the wedding. Some might call it telling. Some might call it responsible, Alara countered. Running a ranch doesn't stop for parties. Of course not, but a husband who truly cared would make time, don't you think? Would prioritize his new bride over cattle and fences. Catherine leaned in, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. Unless, of course, there's nothing real to prioritize. Alara's hands clenched. I don't know what you're implying. Don't you? Catherine's smile widened. My investigators have been very thorough. 6 months of secret courtship, and yet not a single witness to any of it. No one saw you together. No one remembers Colt visiting your shop. It's almost as if the entire relationship was invented whole cloth. Or as if we valued our privacy. Privacy or fiction? It's so hard to tell the difference. Catherine tilted her head. But the truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, this whole charade will collapse. You'll go back to your pathetic little life, and Colt will finally understand that he can't escape his obligations through cheap theatrics. Something in Alara snapped. 6 weeks of performance, of smiling through judgment, of pretending not to notice the whispers and stares. 6 weeks of falling for a man she couldn't have while playing a role she was starting to hate. You're right about one thing, Alara said quietly. The truth does come out. And the truth is that Colt chose me. Not because of contracts or family alliances or business arrangements. He chose me because I don't want anything from him except what he's willing to give. That terrifies you, doesn't it? The idea that someone might value him for himself rather than his money. Catherine's face went pale, then red. You don't know anything about him. I know he's happier without you, that's enough. Catherine opened her mouth, fury blazing in her eyes, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the town square entrance. Raised voices. The crowd parting. Maddox strode through, still in his work clothes, dust-covered and wild-eyed. He scanned the festival with barely controlled desperation until his gaze locked on Alara. He crossed to her in 6 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Are you all right? His voice was rough, urgent against her ear. I'm fine. What are you, I caught them. The thieves. Reuben has them locked in the barn. His hands moved over her shoulders, her arms, like he was checking for injury. But one of them said something about the festival. About you being here alone. I thought... He didn't finish, but Alara understood. He'd thought she was in danger, had left his captured thieves and ridden hell-bent to town because he'd been afraid for her. Not for the arrangement, not for appearances. For her. The crowd was staring now, everyone abandoning pretense to watch this scene play out. Catherine stood frozen, her expression somewhere between shock and calculation. "Colt," Alara said softly, "I'm okay. Nothing happened." He pulled back enough to look at her, his hand still gripping her shoulders. His eyes were storm dark, his jaw set, and he looked like a man barely holding himself together. "I should have been here," he said, "with you. I shouldn't have made you do this alone." "It's fine. I managed." "It's not fine." His voice was low, intense, meant only for her even though half the town was listening. "Nothing about this is fine. Making you face these people alone, asking you to lie for me, pretending—" He stopped, seemed to realize where they were, what he was saying, who was watching. But it was too late. The mask had cracked. Alara reached up, her hand finding his cheek, and the touch was electric, real, not performance, but something raw and terrifying and undeniable. "Take me home," she whispered. Maddox nodded, his hand finding hers, and they walked out of the festival together. Behind them, the whispers exploded like wildfire. Catherine's voice rose above the rest, calling something about proof and fraud and vindication, but Alara didn't hear the words. All she heard was her own heartbeat, thundering against her ribs, and all she felt was Maddox's hand tight around hers, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Reuben drove, his face carefully neutral, while Alara and Maddox sat pressed together in the darkness, not touching beyond where their shoulders met, but the air between them was charged with everything unsaid. When they reached the house, Maddox helped her down and dismissed Reuben with a curt nod. Then he turned to Alara, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, his face was a study in controlled chaos. "We need to talk," he said. "I know." They went to his office, the door closing behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. Maddox paced to the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "That was a mistake," he said finally. "What I said at the festival, what I almost—" He stopped, his hands clenching. "I wasn't thinking. I was worried about you, and I let my guard down, and now Catherine has exactly what she needs to prove we're frauds." "Are we?" Alara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Frauds? We have a contract, an arrangement. That's all this is." "Is it?" Maddox turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "It has to be." "Why?" "Because anything else is too dangerous." He moved closer, and she could see the war happening behind his expression. "I made a rule. No feelings. I made that rule for a reason, Alara, because feelings complicate things. They create vulnerabilities. They give people power over you that they'll use to destroy you the second it's convenient." "Who destroyed you?" The question came out softer than she'd intended. "Who made you so afraid of feeling anything?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, "My father. He loved my mother more than anything in the world. When she died, it broke something in him. He became ruthless, cold, crushed anyone who got in his way. His business partners used his grief as leverage, pushed through deals he never would have accepted otherwise. He spent the last 15 years of his life trying to regain control, and it killed him." Maddox's jaw tightened. "I watched what love did to him, what loss did, and I swore I'd never give anyone that kind of power over me." Alara's heart ached. "So you built walls. I built survival. And what are you surviving, Colt? Because from where I'm standing, you're not living. You're just existing, going through motions, pushing people away, convinced that being alone is somehow safer than letting anyone in." "It is safer." "Maybe, but it's also lonely." She took a step toward him. "You say feelings are dangerous, but you know what I think? I think you're terrified that if you let yourself feel something real, you might realize how much you've been missing." Maddox's expression shuddered. "This conversation is over." "No, it's not." Alara closed the remaining distance between them, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "You want to know what's really dangerous? Spending 6 weeks learning every detail about someone, watching them work themselves to exhaustion because they refuse to trust anyone else to do things right. Seeing them be kind when no one's watching. realizing that underneath all the cold calculation and rigid control, there's a man who's been hurt so badly he's forgotten how to hope for anything better. Alara, I'm in love with you. The words came out in a rush, unstoppable. I tried not to be. I followed your rules. I kept my distance. But it didn't matter because somewhere between the lies and the performances and the quiet mornings drinking coffee, I fell in love with you. And I know that's not what we agreed on. I know it breaks the contract, but it's true. And I'm tired of pretending it's not. The silence that followed was deafening. Maddox stared at her like she'd just stabbed him, his face pale, his breathing harsh. You can't, he finally said. You don't. You're confused. This is just, you're grateful because I helped your father, and proximity made it seem like, don't. Alara's voice cut through his rationalizations. Don't tell me what I feel. I'm not confused. I'm not grateful. I'm in love with you, and you can either accept that or not. But you don't get to diminish it. Maddox took a step back, then another, like she was something dangerous he needed distance from. This ends now. The arrangement, the marriage, all of it. The words hit like a physical blow. What? I'll wire the bank in the morning. Your payment in full. $10,000, just like we agreed. Plus compensation for the 6 weeks you've already given me. You can leave tomorrow. Move anywhere you want. Start over. His voice was mechanical, empty. Consider the contract fulfilled. You're ending this. Alara's voice shook. You're sending me away. I'm setting you free. This was always temporary. You knew that. Free. She laughed, sharp and broken. You think this is freedom? You're running. You're so terrified of feeling something real that you'd rather blow up everything we've built than admit you might actually care about me. I don't. You're lying. I'm protecting us both. Maddox's control was fracturing, his voice rising. You think this ends well? You think if we keep going down this path, something good happens? It doesn't. One of us gets hurt. Probably you. And I won't be responsible for that. So instead you're hurting me now, preemptively. How noble. It's practical. It's cowardice. Alara's hands were fists at her sides. You talk about survival like it's some kind of virtue. But you're not surviving, Colt. You're hiding, and you're doing it so well that you can't even see when someone's offering you a chance at something real. Maddox's face was stone. Pack your things. Reuben will drive you to town in the morning. If you need more time to find a place, I don't need anything from you. The words came out cold, final. Except what you owe me. Wire the money. I'll be gone by noon. She turned and walked out, her spine straight, her head high. But the second she reached her room, the door closing behind her, she collapsed against it and let the tears come. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of falling in love with a man who was so broken he'd rather destroy everything than risk being vulnerable. 6 weeks of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was falling too. And now it was over, done, finished before it ever really began. Alara slid to the floor, her expensive dress pooling around her, and cried until there was nothing left. Morning came gray and bitter cold. Alara woke on the floor, still in her burgundy dress, her face swollen from crying. For a moment she lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that last night had been a nightmare. Then she saw her packed trunk by the door, half filled from when she'd started throwing clothes into it at 3 a.m, and reality crashed down. She was leaving today. The arrangement was over, and Colt Maddox had chosen fear over everything else. Alara pushed herself upright, her body stiff and aching. Through the window she could see the first pale light touching the ranch lands. Somewhere out there, Maddox was probably already working, burying himself in cattle counts and fence repairs, and anything that would keep him from thinking about what he'd destroyed. A soft knock at the door made her tense. "Come in." Lucy entered, her young face troubled. "Mrs. Granger sent me to help you pack, ma'am, and to tell you that breakfast is ready, if you want it." "I don't." Alara's voice came out hoarse. "But thank you." Lucy moved to the trunk, carefully folding the dresses that Alara had simply thrown in. "Is it true? That you're leaving?" "Yes." "But why?"
Everyone says you and Mr. Maddox that you're so happy together. Even Mrs. Granger said she's never seen him smile so much. The words were a knife between Alara's ribs. Sometimes things don't work out the way people think they will. Lucy was quiet for a moment, her hands smoothing a green silk dress. My ma used to say that some people are so scared of being hurt that they hurt themselves first, just to prove they're strong enough to survive it. Alara looked at the girl, really looked at her. Your mother sounds wise. She was, before she died. Lucy folded another dress. I think Mr. Maddox is like that. Scared, I mean. He lost his ma when he was young, and his pa after that, and now he's all alone in this big house. Sometimes I see him standing at the windows, just staring at nothing, and I think maybe he doesn't know how to be any other way. Maybe he doesn't want to be any other way. Or maybe he does, and he just doesn't know how to ask for help. Alara turned away, her throat tight. Lucy meant well, but she didn't understand. Maddox had made his choice, had looked at what they could have had, and decided it wasn't worth the risk. She wasn't going to stand here hoping he'd change his mind. It took another hour to finish packing. The trunk was heavy with silk and velvet, dresses that cost more than her father's house, jewelry she'd never asked for, all the trappings of a life that had never really been hers. She left the ring on the dresser, the diamond catching morning light one last time. She couldn't take that. It had been his mother's, and despite everything, it felt wrong to keep it. Downstairs, the house was eerily quiet. The staff moved through their routines, but there was a tension in the air, like everyone knew something terrible was happening, but no one wanted to acknowledge it. Mrs. Granger appeared in the entrance hall as Alara descended the stairs. Reuben has the carriage ready, Mrs. Maddox? Not for much longer. By nightfall, she'd just be Alara Quinn again. The brief, bizarre chapter of being Mrs. Colt Maddox would be over. Thank you, Alara said quietly, for everything. You've been kind to me, even when you didn't have to be. Mrs. Granger's severe expression softened slightly. You weren't what I expected. I thought you'd be like the others, grasping, shallow, only interested in the Maddox name and money. But you worked hard, you tried, and you made him. She stopped, her jaw tightening. Well, doesn't matter now, does it? No, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Alara followed Mrs. Granger outside where Reuben waited by the carriage, his weathered face carefully neutral. He loaded her trunk without comment, then helped her up to the seat. Where to, ma'am? My father's house. In town. Reuben nodded and took the reins. The carriage lurched forward, and Alara made herself not look back at the house, not look for any sign of Maddox in the windows, not hope for a last-minute reprieve that she knew wouldn't come. But as they rolled down the drive, she saw him, just for a second, standing in the doorway of the barn, covered in dust and looking like he hadn't slept. Their eyes met across the distance, and the pain in his expression was so raw that Alara had to look away before she did something stupid like ask Reuben to stop the carriage. Then they were past the barn, past the gates, and the ranch disappeared behind them. The ride to town took forever and no time at all. Reuben didn't try to make conversation, which Alara appreciated. What was there to say? That she'd fallen in love with a man who'd paid her to pretend? That she'd been stupid enough to think the pretending had become real? Granger's Hollow looked exactly the same as it had 6 weeks ago, but Alara felt like a different person. The girl who'd walked up the Maddox Drive with hope and desperation had been transformed and broken and rebuilt into someone she barely recognized. Her father was standing on the porch when they arrived, his face creased with worry. He must have heard something. News traveled fast in small towns, because he didn't look surprised. Alara. He came down the steps as Reuben helped her from the carriage. What happened? Someone said you left the festival early last night, and now, it's over, Papa. Her voice was steady, which felt like a small miracle. The marriage, it didn't work out. Her father's face crumpled. But the debt, the house, safe, all of it, that was part of our agreement. She watched Reuben unload her trunk, his movements efficient and impersonal. I have money. Enough to take care of you, to move somewhere new if we want. Everything's going to be fine. Except it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. But she couldn't fall apart now, not in front of her father, not with Reuben watching and half the town probably peering through curtains. Reuben set the trunk on the porch and turned to Alara. For a moment, his professional mask slipped.
For what it's worth, ma'am, I think he's making a mistake. A big one. It's his mistake to make. Yes, ma'am, I suppose it is. Reuben tipped his hat. You take care of yourself. He climbed back onto the carriage and drove away, leaving Alara standing in front of her father's house with a trunk full of expensive dresses and a heart that felt like shattered glass. Her father put an arm around her shoulders. Come inside. Tell me everything. But Alara couldn't explain the deal, the lie, the slow, terrible process of falling in love with someone who'd made it clear from the start that love was off the table. Instead, she let her father believe what everyone else would believe, that the marriage had been real but brief, passionate but doomed, another cautionary tale about mismatched couples and hasty decisions. Let them think that. It was easier than the truth. The next 3 days passed in a fog. Alara barely left the house, ignoring the curious looks from neighbors and the whispered speculations she could hear even through closed windows. Her father tried to comfort her, but what could he say? She'd had everything and lost it, and he didn't even know the half of it. On the 4th day, a messenger arrived with an envelope. Inside was a bank draft for $15,000, more than they'd agreed on, and a single sheet of paper with Maddox's handwriting. The additional $5,000 is compensation for the distress I caused. Consider all obligations fulfilled. I've instructed my lawyers to handle the divorce quietly. You'll receive papers within the month. I hope you find the fresh start you deserve. No signature, no apology, just cold clinical closure. Alara stared at the number on the bank draft. $15,000. Life-changing money. The kind of security most people never saw. She could move to San Francisco or Denver or anywhere that wasn't here. Could open her own shop or never work again if she didn't want to. Could build an entire new existence from scratch. And all it had cost was her heart. She folded the paper carefully, slipped it and the bank draft into her bureau drawer, and didn't look at them again. By the end of the first week, the talk in town had reached a fever pitch. Catherine Whitmore was practically crowing, telling anyone who would listen that she'd been right all along. The marriage was a sham, already falling apart. Proof that Colt Maddox couldn't escape his obligations through cheap theatrics. Alara heard the gossip secondhand from Mrs. Patterson at the general store, who seemed to take perverse pleasure in sharing every ugly detail. How Catherine's investigators had compiled evidence, how the lawyers were preparing a case, how the Whitmore family was pushing to reinstate the original engagement contract, claiming Maddox's breach had been calculated and fraudulent. Alara listened to it all with a face carved from stone and said nothing. Let them tear apart the remains of her fake marriage. Let Catherine win whatever victory she thought she'd earned. It didn't matter anymore. Except late at night, when Alara couldn't sleep, it mattered desperately, because she kept seeing Maddox's face in the barn doorway, the raw pain in his eyes, the way his hands had shaken when he'd ended everything. That wasn't the face of a man who didn't care. That was the face of a man terrified of caring too much. Lucy had been right. Some people hurt themselves first, just to prove they could survive it. The question was whether Alara was going to let him. She made it 2 weeks before the anger set in. Anger at Maddox for being a coward. Anger at herself for falling for someone so broken. Anger at the whole stupid situation that had started with a lie and ended with the worst kind of truth. She was in her father's workshop, furiously stitching a torn quilt that didn't need such aggressive repair when Lucy appeared in the doorway. Alara blinked. "Lucy, what are you doing here?" The girl twisted her hands in her apron. "I'm sorry to bother you, Miss Alara. Mrs. I don't know what to call you anymore." "Alara is fine." She set down the quilt. "What's wrong?" "It's Mr. Maddox. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "He's terrible. Since you left, he's barely eating, barely sleeping. He works from before sunrise to after midnight. He fired 2 ranch hands for making small mistakes. Mrs. Granger says she's never seen him so bad, not even after his father died." Alara's chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone needs to. Because he won't talk to anyone, won't listen to reason. He's destroying himself, and I hoped, maybe if you knew, it wouldn't change anything." Alara's voice was flat. "He made his choice, Lucy. He chose to end it. I'm not going to chase after him. But you love him." "Yes. And he doesn't love me. Or he does, and he's too afraid to admit it, which amounts to the same thing." Alara picked up the quilt again, her stitches harsh and uneven.
I deserve better than someone who'd rather be miserable alone than take a risk on being happy.
Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then, the lawyers are coming next week, Catherine's family. They're going to force him to honor the original engagement contract. And I think he's going to let them. Not because he wants to, but because he doesn't care anymore. About anything. The needle slipped, stabbing Alara's finger. She watched blood well up, bright red against her skin. That's his decision to make. Is it? Because it seems to me like he's making it out of fear, not choice. And maybe he needs someone to remind him that he doesn't have to be afraid, that there are things worth fighting for. I already told him that. He didn't listen. So tell him again. Lucy's voice was urgent now, passionate. Tell him until he hears it, because right now he's locked in that big empty house, convincing himself that being alone is what he deserves. And if no one fights for him, he's going to believe it. Alara set down the quilt, her hands trembling. Why do you care so much? Because I've worked at that ranch for 2 years, and in all that time, I never saw Mr. Maddox smile until you arrived. I never heard him laugh. I never saw him look at anything like it mattered except the work and the land and keeping everything running. Lucy wiped her eyes. And then you came, and he was different. Softer, like he remembered how to be human, and now you're gone, and he's worse than before because he knows what he's missing. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Alara stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Granger's Hollow went about its business, small and contained and safe. She could stay here, build a quiet life. Eventually the gossip would die down and people would forget about the brief, strange marriage that had ended before it really began. Or she could fight. The thought terrified her, because fighting meant risking rejection again, meant going back to that ranch and demanding that Maddox look at what he'd thrown away, meant making herself vulnerable to a man who'd already proven he'd choose fear over her. But Lucy was right about one thing. Maddox was fighting too, fighting himself, fighting his fear, fighting the idea that he could deserve something good, and maybe he needed to see that someone was willing to fight just as hard for him, even if it meant getting hurt again. Alara turned to Lucy. When are the lawyers coming? Thursday, 2 days from now? 2 days. Not much time to figure out how to save a man from himself. But Alara had always been good at working with deadlines. She spent Tuesday preparing. First, she went to the bank and deposited the $15,000, getting a receipt that proved the transaction had occurred. Then she visited Judge Patterson, who looked startled to see her but agreed to answer a few questions about contract law. Finally, she stopped by her father's workshop and borrowed some tools. Her father watched her work with growing confusion. Alara, what are you doing? Something stupid, probably. She measured a length of leather carefully. But I'm doing it anyway. Wednesday night, she barely slept. She kept running through what she'd say, how she'd say it, what she'd do if he refused to listen. By dawn, she was exhausted and wired in equal measure, her stomach in knots. Reuben arrived at 8, looking surprised to find her waiting on the porch with a small bag. Miss Alara, I wasn't expecting... Mr. Maddox didn't send me. I know, I'm sending myself. She climbed into the carriage before he could protest. To the ranch. Now, please. Reuben studied her for a long moment. Then a slow smile crossed his weathered face. Yes, ma'am. About time. The ride to the ranch felt different than it had 2 weeks ago. Then, she'd been leaving in defeat. Now she was returning to fight, and the distinction mattered. When they pulled up to the main house, Alara's resolve wavered. This was insane. Maddox had made his feelings clear, or his lack of feelings, or his terror of feelings. Whatever it was, he'd chosen it over her, and coming back wouldn't change that. But she climbed down from the carriage anyway, her bag in one hand and her heart in her throat. Mrs. Granger appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening. Mrs. Maddox, Miss Quinn, I didn't know you were coming. Neither did I, until yesterday. Alara straightened her shoulders. Where is he? In his office. But he's meeting with the lawyers in an hour, and he specifically said, I know what he said. Alara moved past the housekeeper. This won't take long. The walk down the familiar hallway felt like marching to an execution. Alara's hands were shaking, her breath coming too fast.
her carefully prepared speech evaporating from her mind with each step. She reached the office door and didn't let herself hesitate. Didn't knock, just pushed it open and walked in.
Maddox stood at this window, his back to her, silhouetted against the morning light. He looked thinner than she remembered, his shoulders rigid, his posture that of a man braced for impact. "Mrs. Granger, I said I didn't want to be disturbed before—" He turned, and the words died in his throat. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the width of the office. Alara saw everything Lucy had described, the exhaustion, the hollowness, the look of a man who'd won every battle except the one that mattered. "Alara." Her name sounded broken in his mouth. "What are you doing here?" "Stopping you from making the biggest mistake of your life." She set her bag on the desk. "Or the second biggest, anyway. The first was letting me go." Maddox's jaw tightened. "We've been through this. The arrangement is over. You got your payment. It's done." "The arrangement, yes. But this isn't about the arrangement anymore, and you know it." She moved closer. "The lawyers are coming today. Catherine's family, they're going to force you to honor the engagement contract." "Let them." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" His voice was hollow. "What does it matter who I marry? Catherine, some other society woman my business partners approve of. They're all the same. All just alliances and contracts and obligations. And you think that's what you deserve? A life sentence with someone you don't love, doing penance for the crime of having a heart." Maddox's hands clenched. "You need to leave." "No." "Alar, no." She stood her ground. "You sent me away because you were scared, because loving me felt dangerous and uncontrollable, and you've spent your whole life trying to control everything. But here's what you didn't count on. I'm just as stubborn as you are. And I didn't fall in love with the cattle baron or the Maddox fortune or the man everyone else thinks you are. I fell in love with the person you are when you stop performing, when you let your guard down, when you choose kindness over control. That person doesn't exist." "Yes, he does. He pours my coffee in the morning. He reads poetry he pretends not to own. He rides out at midnight to catch thieves because he can't trust anyone else to do it right. He's terrified of being vulnerable, but he's brave enough to protect people he cares about." She took another step closer. "He's you, Colt. The real you. And that's who I love." Maddox's expression cracked. "You don't understand. Everyone I've ever loved has left. My mother died. My father became someone I didn't recognize. Every person who's gotten close has either abandoned me or used me for what I could give them. And you—" His voice broke. "You're the first person in 15 years who made me think maybe it didn't have to be that way. That maybe I could let someone in without it destroying me. And that terrified me more than anything." "So you destroyed it yourself first?" "Yes. Because that felt safer." "Yes." Lara's eyes burned. "And how's that working out for you? Does it feel safe, Colt? Does pushing me away, agreeing to marry Catherine, locking yourself back in this prison you've built, does any of it actually feel safe?" The silence stretched between them, taut and terrible. "No," Maddox finally whispered. "It feels like dying." "Then stop." She closed the final distance between them, her voice fierce. "Stop dying. Stop running. Stop choosing fear over everything else. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. Loving you is the most terrifying thing I've ever done because I know you could break my heart without even trying. But I'd rather risk the heartbreak than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." Maddox looked at her like a drowning man looks at shore, desperate, disbelieving, almost too afraid to hope. "What if I hurt you again?" "Then I'll survive it, and I'll still be here because that's what love is. It's choosing someone even when it's hard. Even when it's scary, even when they've given you every reason to walk away. I don't deserve you." "That's not your decision to make. I'm choosing you, Colt Maddox. All of you. The broken parts, the scared parts, the parts that don't know how to let anyone in. I'm choosing you anyway." She pulled the leather piece from her bag, the one she'd spent Tuesday crafting. A bracelet, simple and sturdy, with a single word burned into the surface. Choose. "This is my answer. My choice, and now you have to make yours." She held it out, her hand steady, even though her heart was breaking all over again. "Choose fear," she said quietly. Sign Catherine's contract. Spend the rest of your life safe and alone and miserable. Or choose this. Choose us. Choose the terrifying, unpredictable, beautiful possibility that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to face everything alone anymore. Maddox stared at the bracelet in her hand like it might burn him. His throat worked, his jaw tight, and Alara could see the war happening behind his eyes. Every instinct he'd built over 15 years of self-preservation screamed at him to refuse. To choose the known pain over the unknown risk. To send her away again and lock himself back in the fortress he'd built. But something else was there too, something raw and desperate and wanting. "I can't," he said, but his voice broke on the words. "Yes, you can. You don't understand what you're asking. I don't know how to do this. How to be what you need. I've spent so long being alone that I don't remember how to be anything else." "Then we'll figure it out together." Alara's hand didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Colt. I'm asking you to try. To choose something other than fear for once in your life. What if I fail? Then we fail together. But at least we'll have tried." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Outside, Alara could hear horses approaching, the lawyers, probably, coming to seal Maddox's fate with contracts and obligations. Time was running out. Maddox looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression was so vulnerable it hurt. "I loved you the moment you told Catherine Whitmore that I was happier without her. Did you know that? We were at the festival, and you were defending me, and I realized—" He stopped, his hands shaking. "I realized you were the first person in my entire life who'd fought for me without expecting anything in return, and it terrified me so badly I couldn't even admit it to myself." Alara's breath caught. "Colt, I've been miserable without you. Every morning I wake up and reach for you before I remember you're gone. Every evening I sit at that massive dining table alone and think about how you made that room feel less empty. Every night I lie awake wondering if I made the worst mistake of my life by pushing you away. So don't push me away anymore. What if I hurt you again? What if you don't?" Alara's voice was fierce. "What if instead of destroying yourself trying to predict every possible disaster, you just let yourself be happy, just for once, just to see what happens?" The sound of carriage wheels on gravel grew louder, voices in the entrance hall, Mrs. Granger saying something about the master being occupied. Maddox's hand came up slowly, trembling, and closed around the bracelet. His fingers brushed Alara's, and the contact sent electricity through her entire body. "If I do this," he said quietly, "if I choose you, it's not temporary. It's not a contract or an arrangement. It's real, all of it. And I'm going to be terrible at it because I don't know how to let someone in. But I'll try. Every day I'll try. That's all I'm asking." He slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, the leather dark against his skin, and the word "choose" faced upward like a promise. The office door burst open. Catherine Whitmore strode in, flanked by two men in expensive suits. She stopped short when she saw Alara, her face cycling through shock, fury, and calculation in rapid succession. "You!" she spat. "What are you doing here? The marriage is over. You took your payment and left." "And came back," Alara said evenly. "Funny how that works?" One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Maddox, we're here to discuss the reinstatement of your engagement to Miss Whitmore. Given the fraudulent nature of your recent marriage—" "There was nothing fraudulent about it," Maddox interrupted, his voice hard as iron. "And there won't be any reinstatement. The original contract is void." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Your father signed. My father is dead. And I'm not him." Maddox moved to stand beside Alara, his shoulder brushing hers. "I'm not honoring a contract made by a man who tried to control my life from beyond the grave. I'm making my own choices, starting now. You can't just— The penalty clause alone is $50,000. I'm aware. Send the bill." He reached for Alara's hand, lacing their fingers together. "It's worth every cent." The lead lawyer stepped forward, his expression calculating. "Mr. Maddox, perhaps we should discuss this privately, without the influence of—" "My wife?" Maddox's grip on Alara's hand tightened.
No, whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of her. Catherine laughed, sharp and bitter. Your wife. Please. Everyone knows this whole thing was a sham, a desperate attempt to avoid your obligations. My investigators have documented everything. The suspicious timing, the lack of witnesses to your courtship, the fact that she's nothing but a seamstress from nowhere who saw an opportunity and took it. You're right about one thing, Ilara said, her voice steady. I did see an opportunity, but not the one you think. I saw a chance to help my father, to save our home. And yes, I took it, because I was desperate and scared and I didn't see any other way. Catherine's smile was triumphant. So you admit the marriage was fraudulent? The marriage started as a business arrangement, Ilara continued, but it became real. Somewhere between the performances and the lies and the pretending, we stopped acting. We fell in love. And that's not fraud, Catherine. That's just life being messier and more complicated than contracts can account for. Convenient story. It's the truth. Maddox's voice was quiet but absolute. I married Ilara to escape the engagement to you. That part's not a secret, but everything that happened after, that was real. The only fraud here is the idea that I was ever going to be happy trapped in a marriage arranged by dead men and power-hungry families. The second lawyer spoke up, his tone conciliatory. Mr. Maddox, be reasonable. The Whitmore family has significant influence over the cattle markets. Refusing this alliance could have serious consequences for your business operations. Then I'll deal with those consequences. Maddox's jaw was set. I've built this ranch from the ground up, turned my father's failing operation into the most profitable spread in 3 counties. I did that by making hard choices and taking calculated risks. And right now, I'm calculating that my happiness is worth more than any business alliance. Happiness, Catherine scoffed. With her? How long do you think that will last? A year? 2? Eventually, you'll remember who you are and where you come from, and you'll realize what a mistake you've made. Maybe, Maddox looked at Ilara, and his expression was so open it made her chest ache. But I'd rather spend 2 happy years with her than 50 miserable ones with you. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Catherine's face went scarlet. You'll regret this. My family will make sure of it. We'll freeze you out of every market, every contract, every opportunity. You'll watch your precious ranch crumble because you were too stubborn to see reason. Try it, Maddox said flatly. I've survived worse than your family's disapproval. I'll survive this too. The lead lawyer gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements. Very well, we'll be filing breach of contract suits by the end of the week. You'll be hearing from our offices shortly. I'll be waiting. Catherine turned to leave, then paused at the door. This isn't over, Colt. You're making an enemy you can't afford. No, Maddox said quietly. I'm making a choice I should have made years ago. The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the office like a gunshot. For a moment, neither Maddox nor Ilara moved. Then Maddox's shoulders sagged, and he looked at her with something like wonder. I just blew up my entire business network for you. You did, Ilara agreed. Regretting it yet? Ask me in 50 years. She laughed, the sound coming out shaky and relieved. That's a long time. Good. I'm going to need at least that long to figure out how to do this right. He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. I love you. I should have said it 2 weeks ago instead of pushing you away. I should have said it the moment I realized it, but I'm saying it now, and I'm going to keep saying it until you believe me. I believe you. Ilara leaned into his touch. And I love you too, even when you're being an idiot. Especially when I'm being an idiot, apparently. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. I'm sorry for sending you away, for choosing fear over you, for being too much of a coward to fight for this when it mattered. You're fighting for it now. That's what counts. Is it enough? It's a start. She pulled back enough to look at him properly. We still have a lot to figure out. The divorce papers you mentioned, the legal mess with Catherine's family, how we're actually going to make this work when we started with lies and ended up here. One problem at a time. Maddox tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Starting with the divorce papers. I'll wire my lawyer today. Tell him to burn them. And the breach of contract suit? Let them file. Let them take their $50,000. It's worth it. That's a lot of money, Colt.
I know, and I'd pay 10 times that to keep you. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Money I can make back. You, I can't replace. Alara's throat tightened. What about your business partners? If Catherine's family really does freeze you out, then I'll find new partners, build new alliances. I didn't get where I am by playing it safe. A wry smile crossed his face. Though I suppose marrying a seamstress I'd known for 12 hours wasn't exactly playing it safe either. That worked out, though. Eventually, after I nearly destroyed it, his expression sobered. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. Old habits, old fears. I'm going to pull away or shut down or try to control things I can't control. And when that happens, I need you to call me on it. Fight with me. Don't let me retreat back into the fortress. I can do that. Good. Because I'm terrible at this. At being vulnerable, at trusting people, at believing that good things can last. He pressed his forehead to hers. But I want to learn with you, if you'll have me. I think we already established that I will. Alara smiled. Though we should probably make it official this time. Actual vows, actual ceremony, no contracts, no arrangements. Just us. Are you proposing to me? Someone has to. You're too busy being emotionally stunted. Maddox laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. Fair point. Yes then, let's do it properly. Marry me again, Alara Quinn, for real this time. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Again. As many times as it takes for you to believe this is real. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Alara felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding solid ground after weeks of drowning. When they finally pulled apart, Mrs. Granger was standing in the doorway, her severe expression softened into something almost fond. I take it Mrs. Maddox is staying, then? She is, Maddox confirmed. Good. Lucy's been moping around like someone died. This should cheer her up. Mrs. Granger's mouth twitched. I'll have her prepare your room again, ma'am, unless you'll be needing separate quarters this time. Alara felt her face heat. I think we'll figure that out. I'm sure you will. Mrs. Granger turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, sir, you made the right choice. Your father spent his whole life trying to control everything and everyone around him. He died alone and angry because of it. I'm glad you're choosing differently. She disappeared before Maddox could respond, leaving them alone again. She's right, you know, Alara said quietly. About your father. About choosing differently. I know. Maddox's arms came around her, solid and warm. For the first time in 15 years, I'm not trying to be him. I'm trying to be better. You are better. With you, maybe. On my own, he shook his head. On my own, I'm still that scared kid who watched his mother die and his father turn cold, still convinced that letting anyone matter is the same as signing up for inevitable loss. But you're letting me matter anyway. Yes, because apparently I'm an optimist underneath all the cynicism. Alara pulled back to look at him. What happens now after the lawsuits and the business fallout and all of it? Now we rebuild. The ranch, the reputation, the relationships we'll need. It won't be easy. Catherine's family has a lot of power, and they're not going to let this go quietly. He touched the bracelet on his wrist. But I've faced worse odds, and this time I'm not facing them alone. No, Alara agreed. This time you have a partner. A real one, not a contract. Not a contract, she confirmed. Though we should probably write down some rules, just to keep things clear. Maddox raised an eyebrow. Rules? New ones. Better ones. She ticked them off on her fingers. 1. No more pushing each other away when things get scary. 2. We fight for this, even when it's hard. 3. We choose each other, every day, no matter what storms come. Those are good rules. He caught her hand, kissed her knuckles. Any others? 1 more. No feelings was the old rule. The new rule is all the feelings. We don't hide them. We don't suppress them. We don't pretend they don't exist. We feel everything, and we deal with it together. That one's going to be hard for me. I know. That's why it's important. Maddox nodded slowly. Okay. New rules. I can work with that. They stood there in the office, wrapped in each other, and for the first time since this whole complicated mess began, Alara felt like they were on solid ground. Not because the problems had disappeared, Catherine's lawsuit was real, the business consequences were real, the challenges ahead were very real, but because they were facing them together. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Maddox sent telegrams to his lawyers instructing them to prepare for the breach of contract suit and to destroy the divorce papers. He met with Reuben and the other ranch hands, explaining that there would be changes coming, but the ranch would weather them. He drafted new business plans that didn't rely on the Whitmore family's connections. Alara spent the time reacquainting herself with the house. Lucy was ecstatic to have her back, chattering nonstop about everything that had happened in the 2 weeks she'd been gone. Mrs. Granger thawed considerably, even going so far as to ask Alara's opinion on dinner menus. The staff, who'd seemed uncertain about her before, now looked at her with something like respect. She'd fought for Maddox. And in their world, that meant something. Dinner that night was different than any meal they'd shared before. They ate in the dining room, but Maddox sat beside her instead of at the opposite end of the table. They talked, really talked, about everything and nothing. About his plans for the ranch, about her ideas for a sewing shop she might open in town, about the wedding they'd have, small and real this time, with actual vows they both meant. "When?" Alara asked. "The wedding?" "As soon as possible. I'm not risking you changing your mind." "I won't." Even when Catherine's family makes good on their threats? Even when business partners pull out and profit margins shrink, and everyone in 3 counties is talking about the scandal? Even then, Alara reached for his hand across the table. "I didn't choose you for your business connections, Colt. I chose you because underneath all the walls and fear, you're a good man. That doesn't change whether you're the richest rancher in Wyoming or working your way back up from nothing." His throat worked. "You say that now. I'll say it a year from now, too. 10 years. 50 years. She squeezed his fingers. "That's what choosing someone means. It's not just for the good times. It's for all of it. Even when I'm being an emotionally stunted idiot? Especially then. Someone has to keep you in line." He laughed, and the sound was lighter than she'd heard in weeks. "I suppose I'm lucky you're willing to take on that job." "Very lucky. I'm a terrible seamstress, but an excellent keeper of stubborn cattle barons." They finished dinner and moved to the library, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Alara curled up in one of the leather chairs while Maddox poured whiskey for himself and tea for her, remembering without asking how she took it. "Tell me something," she said, as he settled into the chair beside hers. "When did you know that this was more than just an arrangement?" Maddox was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the fire. "The morning after the first cattleman's dinner. You were exhausted, you'd barely slept, but you came down to breakfast anyway. And I poured you coffee, and you smiled at me like it was the nicest thing anyone had ever done, like such a small gesture mattered." He turned to look at her. "And I realized I wanted to keep doing small things that made you smile, not for show, just because I could. That was 5 weeks ago." "I know." "You knew for 5 weeks and didn't say anything?" "I was hoping it would go away." His mouth quirked. "It didn't. It got worse. Every conversation, every shared meal, every time you fell asleep reading in this chair and I covered you with a blanket, I kept telling myself it was just proximity, just the performance becoming habit. But I knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it." Alara set down her tea. "And now?" "Now I'm done lying to myself about what this is." He reached for her hand, pulling her from her chair to his lap. "This is real. Messy and complicated and terrifying, but real. And I'm not running from it anymore." She settled against him, her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I wasn't going to let you run anyway." "I noticed. You're very stubborn," says the man who'd rather destroy his entire business network than admit he was wrong. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the ranch settled into darkness, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the wind picking up like it always did after sunset. "Colt?" Alara said quietly. "Hmm? I'm scared too, of this, of how much it matters. What if we fail? What if the real version of us isn't as good as the performance was?" His arms tightened around her. "Then
we'll fail together. And we'll pick ourselves up and try again. That's what the new rules mean, right? We don't give up just because it's hard. Right. She breathed in the scent of him, leather and smoke and something uniquely him. No giving up. No giving up, he echoed, even when I'm being impossible. Especially then. He kissed the top of her head, and Alara felt something in her chest expand. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not the ranch or the money or the security. Just this. Quiet moments with someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. The lawsuit from Catherine's family arrived exactly 1 week later. $50,000 for breach of contract, plus additional damages for reputational harm and lost business opportunities. The total came to nearly $75,000. Maddox read the papers at breakfast, his expression unreadable. Then he set them aside and reached for his coffee. Well? Alara asked. Well, we're about to lose a significant amount of money. He took a sip. Worth it. You're sure? Completely. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Though we might need to postpone that elaborate wedding you were planning. Budget's going to be tight for a while. I never wanted elaborate anyway. Just real. Then we'll have real. This weekend, if you're ready. Judge Patterson, a few witnesses, actual vows. This weekend, Alara agreed. And this time when you call me your wife, it won't be a lie. This time, Maddox said quietly, it'll be the truest thing I've ever said. They married on a Saturday morning in late November, with frost on the ground and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Judge Patterson officiated, flanked by Reuben, Mrs. Granger, Lucy, and Alara's father, who cried through the entire ceremony. Alara wore a simple cream dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair that Lucy had picked that morning. Maddox wore his best suit and the leather bracelet she'd made, the word choose visible on his wrist. The vows were brief but real. Promises to choose each other, to fight for each other, to face whatever came together. No contracts. No arrangements. Just two people deciding to build a life despite all the reasons it might not work. When Judge Patterson pronounced them married, Maddox kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it properly. And maybe he had been. The small reception afterward was held in the dining room with food Mrs. Granger had spent days preparing. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was full of people who genuinely wished them well. Even some of the ranch hands showed up, awkward in their Sunday clothes, offering congratulations with rough sincerity. Reuben pulled Alara aside during the meal. I was wrong about you, ma'am. When you first showed up, I thought you were just another person trying to use Mr. Maddox for what he could give them. But you fought for him. Made him remember how to be human again. That takes courage. Or stubbornness, Alara said. Same thing, usually. Reuben smiled. Take care of him. He acts tough, but underneath he's still that scared kid who lost everyone he loved. Needs someone to remind him he's allowed to be happy. I will, Alara promised, for as long as he'll have me. That'll be a while, I expect. The celebration wound down as afternoon turned to evening. Guests departed, the staff cleaned up, and eventually Alara and Maddox were alone in the library, the fire burning low. So, Maddox said, we're actually married now. We were actually married before. But this time it counts. This time it counts, Alara agreed. She was curled against him on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders, both of them exhausted and content. No regrets? About marrying you? None? About the $75,000 I'm about to pay Catherine's family? A few. We'll manage, we always do. He kissed her forehead. I like how you say we now, like we're a unit. We are a unit, that's what marriage means. I'm still getting used to it. 15 years of doing everything alone, and now... He pulled her closer. Now I have a partner. Someone who sees all my flaws and disasters and chooses me anyway. Your flaws make you interesting. My flaws make me difficult. Same thing. Alara tilted her head back to look at him. We're going to be okay, you know. Whatever comes. The lawsuits, the business problems, all of it. We'll figure it out together. How are you so sure? Because we already survived the worst part. We survived almost losing each other. Everything else is just details. Maddox was quiet for a moment. Then, I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do.
More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I know. You show me every day, even when you don't say it. She laced her fingers through his. And I love you too. The real you, not the performance. That's not going to change. Even when I'm impossible, especially when you're impossible. They sat like that until the fire burned out and darkness settled over the ranch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the lawsuit, the business restructuring, the slow work of rebuilding what they'd nearly destroyed. But tonight, they were just two people who'd chosen each other against all odds, learning how to build a life from honesty instead of lies. 3 years later, Alara stood in the same spot where she'd first crashed the engagement party, watching the ranch hands prepare for the autumn cattle drive. Beside her, Colt held their daughter, 18 months old with his dark hair and her stubborn chin, while their son kicked impatiently in Alara's belly, due any day now. "Mama, down!" Clara demanded, squirming in her father's arms. "Not until Uncle Reuben brings the gentle horses," Colt said patiently. "We talked about this." Clara pouted but settled, and Alara caught Colt's eye over their daughter's head. He smiled, the expression still slightly surprised, like he couldn't quite believe this was his life now. The ranch had survived Catherine's lawsuit, though they'd paid dearly for it. Business had been lean that first year, with several key partnerships dissolving and contracts canceled. But Maddox had rebuilt, slowly and carefully, forming new alliances based on merit rather than family connections. The ranch was smaller now, but more profitable, more efficient, more his. And he was different too. Still stubborn, still driven, still prone to working too hard and sleeping too little, but softer around the edges, more willing to ask for help, to admit when he was wrong, to let Alara in when the old fears surfaced. They'd fought, of course. Spectacular arguments that sometimes lasted days, about everything from cattle prices to baby names to whose turn it was to get up in the middle of the night. But they always came back together, always chose each other again, because that was the rule they'd built their marriage on. Choose. Every day. No matter what. Alara's sewing shop in town had become quietly successful, employing 3 other seamstresses and taking on custom orders from as far away as Denver. She worked 3 days a week, leaving the other days for the ranch and the children and the life they were building together. Her father had passed peacefully the previous spring, his debts cleared, his house safe, his daughter settled in a way he'd never imagined. He'd held baby Clara hours before he died, whispering that he was proud, that he'd been wrong to worry, that love had found its way after all. Reuben appeared now with 2 gentle mares, saddled and ready. Clara shrieked with delight and practically launched herself from Colt's arms toward the horses. "Careful!" Colt called, following his daughter. "Clara Elaine Maddox, I swear if you spook those horses." But Clara was already patting the nearest mare's nose, completely fearless, and the horse was nuzzling her gently. Colt stopped, shaking his head with a mixture of exasperation and pride. "She's going to be trouble," he said, helping Clara into the smallest saddle. "She gets it from you," Alara replied. "She gets it from you. The stubbornness is definitely your contribution. And the inability to follow instructions? Also you." Alara laughed, resting a hand on her swollen belly. "This one's going to be worse. I can already tell." "Then we're doomed." But Colt was smiling as he said it, one hand steadying Clara in the saddle while the other reached for Alara. "Completely doomed. Best kind of doomed there is." They stood together, watching their daughter ride slow circles in the yard under Reuben's careful supervision, and Alara thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago. Desperate, scared, walking into a party where she didn't belong and accidentally finding everything she'd never known to hope for. "Do you ever think about how we started?" she asked quietly. "The lie of it?" Colt considered. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm trying to explain to Clara why lying is bad and she points out that her parents met through a lie." "What do you tell her?" "That sometimes people find truth through lies. That the best things in life come from taking risks you probably shouldn't take." He pulled Alara closer, his hand warm on her back. That her mother walked into the wrong room at exactly the right time and changed everything. "I didn't change everything, I just gave you permission to change yourself." "Same thing." He kissed her temple. "I was dying slowly before you showed up, going through motions, building an empire while forgetting why any of it mattered. You reminded me." made me want things I'd convinced myself were too dangerous to want. Like a family. Like happiness. Like a future that wasn't just endless work and isolation. He watched Clara wave at them from the saddle, her face alight with joy. Like this. All of this. Alara leaned into him, feeling the baby kick between them, and knew this was what choosing looked like. Not a single dramatic decision, but 1,000 small ones. Choosing patience when frustration came easy. Choosing vulnerability when walls were safer. Choosing each other over and over, until the choosing became as natural as breathing. "I love you," she said quietly. "I know." Colt's voice was soft, certain. "And I love you. No fear, no hesitation, just truth." They stood there in the afternoon light, surrounded by the life they'd built from lies and fear and desperate hope. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was messier, harder, more complicated than any contract could have predicted. But it was theirs, chosen, real, worth every risk they'd taken to find it. Clara called out something about wanting to go faster, and Colt sighed and went to negotiate with his fearless daughter. Alara watched him crouch beside the horse, patient and careful, teaching Clara the same way he'd taught her 3 years ago, with steady hands and quiet encouragement and faith that she could learn. The old Colt Maddox would never have had this, would never have allowed himself the vulnerability of fatherhood, the messiness of family, the terrifying, beautiful reality of letting people matter. But he'd chosen differently, chosen fear over safety, chaos over control, love over the fortress he'd built, and it had saved him. Alara pressed a hand to her belly, feeling their son move beneath her palm, and smiled. The future was uncertain, full of challenges they couldn't predict and problems they'd have to solve together. But that was okay. They'd survived the worst already. They'd survived almost losing each other, almost choosing fear, almost letting the best thing in their lives slip away because it felt too dangerous to hold on to. Everything else was just details. And as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Alara Quinn Maddox stood in the place where her story had begun, surrounded by everything her lie had become, and knew that sometimes the wrong room was exactly where you were meant to be. Sometimes the stranger was your future, and sometimes love found you in the last place you thought to look, in the space between a desperate deal and a heart brave enough to break all the rules.